The keys I'm using are in the bottom right corner of the viewport. To make a gradient material in Blender, it takes just a few nodes. I'll add a material to the cube. I add a gradient texture node and connect it to the principled shader. This now gives me the start of a gradient on the cube. To more easily control the gradient, with the Node Wrangler add-on activated, I can select the gradient texture node and use Ctrl+T to add a texture coordinate node and a mapping node. Now if I change the rotation to 90 degrees, I can change the orientation of the gradient. If I change the scale to 0.5, I now have a gradient that shows a more gradual transition from black to white. I can now add a color ramp between the gradient texture and the principled shader. This will allow me to change the color of the gradients. I can move the color stops to make changes to the gradient. I can also choose a different blending mode on the gradient texture. For now, I'll use easing as the blending mode. I can now add more color stops to add more colors to the gradient. Now that we looked at the basics of a gradient material, let's try a real-world scenario. I'll add the same nodes I just did for the cube. I changed the rotation to 90 degrees so I can have the gradient go from bottom to top. I add a mix RGB between the gradient texture and the color ramp. This will allow me to add a second texture. I now add a magic texture node and connect it to the mix RGB node. I also connect the mapping node to the magic texture node. Now I can see a pattern emerge. If I move the black color stop, I can now affect the pattern. I can add a third color stop, and now I have a procedural pattern.